Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's episode, the very first episode of a brand new show. We have not done this in a while, folks, here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. It is Hell Island. We are so pleased to welcome you to the first ever episode. We're doing a day late, but definitely not a dollar short. On the show today, we have labor counselors defying a call by Keir Starmer to say nothing on the Israel-Gaza war. Also, a really interesting piece in Novara that we're going to go through. Andy McDonald, the recently expelled Labour MP, is suing a Tory MP who accused him of seeking to justify the Hamas atrocity. And we're taking a look at planned protests for Palestine on Armistice Day. Ladies and gentlemen, it is so good to have you here. It is the brand new number one left-wing, progressive, socialist, whatever you want to call it, news show coming to you from actually America, talking about the bloody UK. Sorry to all the British listeners who I may have just turned off with that. But anyway, we have a very, very good show for you today. I really do want to get into a lot of stuff, but just to say to everyone who may be listening, thank you, again so much for doing so, wherever you may be listening from, whether it be America or the UK, obviously, as well. I just do want to, start by getting into my background with British politics. And for me, I've always been, for a pretty long period of my, relatively short life, I've been pretty, interested in, following the news, reporting on the news, and just doing, broadcasts about it. Newsflash, I have done for quite a long period of time, since I believe it was if I remember correctly, it was March 5th or March 7th, 2017. But yeah, that is how long I've been doing it for. It's been, so many different ways, so many different iterations. But, around the beginning of the pandemic, actually, my kind of shut-in hobby was following British politics. And specifically, this was around the time that, shout out to Novara Media, Aaron Bassani, all those people, they released the Labour Leaks, which was this really incredible. So essentially, again, I'm assuming there'd be some people listening in America about this, and it essentially is as if they, Bernie Sanders had won the nomination. So this is obviously Jeremy Corbyn, who is the, former left-wing leader of the Labour Party, first, socialist leader they've had, true socialist leader they've had since Clement Attlee, who made the NHS back in 1945. But he essentially won the nomination. They spent a really long period of time trying to sabotage him, and this report came out in 2020. And just the just vivid nature of that, report right as we saw, at the beginning of the whole COVID pandemic, and also the end of the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. That was a big moment for me in terms of getting into British politics and just getting myself immersed in the kind of hopelessness of the leadership of Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, but also, the incredibly inspiring things that we've seen from the kind of resurgence of trade union movements, both in the U.S., but also really in the UK, kind of first, let's be real, shout out to, Mick Lynch and the RMT for really kicking that off. And then, of course, we have the just ever-depressing yet kind of Labour government juxtaposed against a dysfunctional, but also, incredibly, incredibly evil, and some really, just fascist kind of nativist strains coming out in the likes of Suella Braverman in her role as the foreign secretary under Rishi Sunak. But yeah, this is all coming, of course, in the context of for those of you who don't know, some level of knowledge about British politics is required to watch the show for all the Americans listening. I'm not going to go explain everything, but yeah, so that is a kind of look as we get into the kind of the next general election. We're going to, which is presumed to be late 2024, early 2025. We're going to get into all of this stuff. And I really think it is. We're looking at a semi-comparative lens. I'm definitely going to be trying to put in my American perspective on things, but I do want to, for sure, really get into the meat and potatoes of British politics. And I will also, pleased to report, be doing the show from London starting in 2024. So that's very, very exciting. I'm very excited about that. But we start with a really kind of interesting and very shocking story, a really cool story coming out of Labour. I'm going to do a lot of, it'll probably be mostly, I feel like the stories I'm talking about will be about Labour, but, Tories are in government, so we'll be talking about them a fair bit as well. But this really has been a shocking situation, I think, for the left in both America and the UK with regards to how much their elected leadership in the form of either Joe Biden or Keir Starmer has just absolutely, and Keir Starmer has been, for those Americans who may be pissed at Joe Biden out there, Keir Starmer has been about 20 times worse. Because not only has he been doing everything that Joe Biden's been doing, but he's just been doing it after. So kind of just coming off as this kind of like simpering behind the U.S. and just being like, the moment you say humanitarian pause, we'll say it right after. And then we'll, as I say, brief it to the media and say, oh, we're proud of that. We're proud of that. We just did fall in line with what the U.S. said, which, is honestly pretty pathetic. But all 31 Labour councillors in Sheffield have defied Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership and their refusal to call for a ceasefire. And also their threats to punish people. By the way, this comes in the context of years of just kicking left-wing members out of the Labour Party and stopping them from standing in elections for very spurious causes. So that threat there is real. So Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership, they have obviously refused to call a ceasefire, but all 31 Labour councillors in Sheffield have defied Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership in support for Israel by voting for a motion calling for a ceasefire. This was proposed by the Greens at a full council meeting on Wednesday and passed with cross-party backing, and also called on the government to stop all arms sales and military aid to Israel, condemning its abstention at the UN on a humanitarian truce, and resolved the council to join the Sheffield Coalition against Israeli apartheid, which is pretty cool. That they're going to have the council on that as well. This official kind of government body in a very left-wing kind of city center, obviously, but in kind of, undoubtedly labor heartlands, but, it's still nice to see in this kind of always going factional battle between the left and the right of the Labour Party. Like that is definitely going to be a very, very huge deal. So Councillor, and by the way, Labour councillors have just been the leading kind of moral voice in the party for this stuff. There's been no, kind of major group, Momentum, which is the Corbyn faction of the party, as it is called, kind of within the party. There's all these groups within the Labour Party. That is a big one. But they did not really lead the way. It was just, kind of councillors on the ground in areas with high Muslim populations, which are big parts of, and even probably more so than America, big parts of Labour's electoral coalition, especially in kind of seats in the heart and especially the, Tower Hamlets parts of London. Central and East London is probably the biggest parts where that plays a role, but also really in cities up and down the country, and kind of the BAME population. Councillor Abdissam Mohammed, Labour's parliamentary candidate for Sheffield Central, also made a speech in favor of the motion at Wednesday's meeting, which is very big because that could be, a clear grounds, and under, what is kind of current precedent in the Labour Party, as sad as it is, for David Evans, the General Secretary, to come in and really easily suspend Abdissam Mohammed, this guy who's standing for a pretty, big seat. This would be a, this is all relatively moderate people, but again, not like flaming left wing figures as they have ensured, but it is really, that's what makes this so significant, and it is really kind of encouraging to see that on both sides of the pond, people are really truly standing up to this, and this is going to be, it really is inspiring that after being so long kind of put on the sidelines and ignored for so long, that this is an issue that people are, really standing up for and challenging, leaders that once looked very, very secure within their kind of electoral bases. I'm talking about, Joe Biden and Keir Starmer. He's somebody who is still probably very secure. It is still a small part of the population, but in terms of internal party pressure, which mostly just because of the far more democratic structure of the Labor Party does tend to matter a lot more than in the United States, because it's, you're going to have counselors resigning, you're going to have people up and down the chain of the party bureaucracy. Just way more people involved with the Labor Party than the kind of running of the Labor Party, the maintenance of the Labor Party, and kind of representing the Labor Party than with the Democratic Party, just kind of per capita. So that, and if they all stand up, if they all cause ripples along the kind of chain of command, by doing this, it's going to make it even harder for somebody like David Evans at the top to come in and tell people to kind of sit down and shut up, or try and stop them from standing, or suspend them from the party, which we'll get into later with Andy McDonald. The vote comes just 3 weeks after the Council flew the Israeli flag from the Sheffield Town Hall, and protesters promptly scaled the building to remove the flag during a pro-Palestinian rally on the 10th of October. Across the country, more than 30 labor councillors have resigned since Starmer, a former human rights lawyer, told LBC on October 11th that Israel had a right to withhold power and water from Palestinian civilians trapped in Gaza. Labor council groups, including in Manchester, Brent Slough, Cambridge, and they've all put out statements calling for a ceasefire. Well, actually, the Labour mayor of Leicester has criticized Starmer for his one-sided response. Again, these are people who are at the best on, I would say, in kind of soft left positions. I can't even really speak for, obviously, every councillor in Manchester, Brent Slough, and Cambridge, but it is, I have not, in any way seen the Labour mayor there to be super, left-wing in Leicester. But it's just, again, somebody who is just, I'm assuming, has a pretty large Muslim population, Sheffield as well. There's really kind of the BAME community stretches out through a lot of those cities in kind of middle and northern England. And they are really standing up to it. And last week, 250 Muslim labor councillors wrote a separate letter to the leadership in support of a ceasefire. Most of the leader's latest signatories are reportedly not Muslim. So it's good to get other people's voices on that as well. And by the way, that shout out to Peter Soulsby, who's served as the Labour mayor of Leicester since 2011 and was formerly a Labour MP. He actually criticized, big credit to him, risking his position there for sure, at least a future challenge to his position. So, yeah, good for him there. All right. And kind of looking in the context of this, looking at what Keir Starmer is doing on all this kind of resistance in the party, we've seen it a lot before. I don't know if we've seen it from as factions as broad as we have, but I think the really, the important thing that we keep hammering home, and it seems kind of almost a little bit defeatist to say this, and Michael Chesham has an opinion piece in Navarre Media about this, but it, essentially saying Keir Starmer doesn't care that you are angry with him, and that this is kind of goes to a very interesting part, of a debate that is had, in the U.S. as well, but a lot of other countries, about when there is a dominant kind of liberal party that includes a smaller left-wing faction that, at a time, at least in the Labour Party's case, was a bigger left-wing faction, but has been kind of systematically attacked. How do you resist? What is the most effective way to challenge Keir Starmer? And, is it true that all roads lead to a Pyrrhic victory, or is it possible that there can be some sort of way to wield the power that the left still has, if they have it, in the Labour Party, to really make him, in some way feel some sort of pain for what he has done, without being kind of tarred and feathered as supporting the Tories? By the time Keir Starmer appeared at Chatham House on Tuesday morning to set his opposition to a ceasefire in Gaza, more than 3,000 children have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Outside the venue, protesters accused him of supporting a genocide. Online activists exchanged assurances that voters would punish him for failing to call for an end to the slaughter. And again, it would be a big part, a very, very big part of the Labor coalition part. Definitely a bigger part than in the U.S., and it's something that is really going to be taking a big role. Here's how it sounded when he was coming out of Chatham House. His office is there. You hear the cries of shame. People trying to, protest around his car. Chanting ceasefire now as he pulls out in central, looks like central London, I don't know. Where's Chatham House? I'm assuming central London. He pulls off in his big Discovery gas-guzzling SUV as people follow him. And, I think one person tried to kind of stop his car, but it didn't really go as long. Go for that long. So again, but Keir Starmer is a winner, but he doesn't care what you think. For some, his elevation to the Labour leadership, many on the left, myself included, argued that he would need to keep much of Jeremy Corbyn's policy agenda to win a general election. Evidently, he does not. Of course, that comes as the complete epic, disproportionate collapse of the Conservative Party. Shows that much, with the crashing economy, with Liz Truss, with Boris Johnson back to back, in that disastrous 2022 year that they had, set the Labour up for a essentially golden path to the throne. That they really had to try hard to bungle, and that obviously included, a lot of people that supported Jeremy Corbyn, because they, just felt compelled to support him in a certain way. He hadn't done enough to really shake their support. But will this change things? I think it's going to be kind of an interesting, at the very least, open question. So he says the scale of Tory unpopularity coupled with the monopoly on opposition granted to Labour by first past the post means he can do whatever he likes. A lack of enthusiasm among young Labour voters will not alter the electoral arithmetic. Neither will widespread anger among progressives at Starmer's support for the Israeli siege in Gaza. Attempting to explain Starmer's positioning with reference to electoral necessity is a fool's errand. It's almost like, at this point, it's just like a little dishonest. It's like you did it because, you do it because you can. You did it because you won. And, that is why you're going to continue to keep doing it. Like, don't try to come at me with like, it's electorally necessary. Like, nothing that's, at this point in time for Keir Starmer, when the worst he can be is up 20 points, is like, what electoral necessity are you talking about? Again, you could pull up Donald Trump, shoot someone at Fifth Avenue, and still not lose any votes. The more right-wing Labour is when it enters Downing Street, the more their theory of change will be vindicated. And that's, the Labour moderates, like their dream, and the more right-wing and much more he wins by, the more it will be an endorsement for their policy program, especially after they've spent probably, every second of 2015 to 2019 trying to destroy their own party, to almost, take over its kind of, rump or husk, and kind of fill it back up again with in kind of a big purple fume, just like it's almost like the resurrection of like a dead force, and it's just like possessed by an evil figure. Almost, you know what it is? It's like the Game of Thrones, when someone who gets killed in Game of Thrones turns into a White Walker and their eyes turn blue. Like the Labour Party's eyes, just turned blue. It really has been, or at least since 2020. Did you know that Starmer's father was a toolmaker? That's a classic little bit. We'll be talking about Keir Starmer's father being a toolmaker probably more than. Did you know my father was a toolmaker? Yeah, he mentioned it sometimes. Illustrating connectedness to a traditional working class life resonates with key sections of the electorate. But underneath the messaging, Labour's commitments look shakier. This summer, the leadership attempted to ditch commitments on workers' rights, such as sick pay and unfair dismissal. Which is honestly like unfair dismissal. It's like you're the Labour Party. Just like you're essentially asking people, you're poking people in the face and saying, "What will you do?" He was incredibly proud of his opposition to opposing sick pay, and he assures us there will be no pay rise to allow workers to recover from the worst wage oppression in centuries. For much of the commentariat, Starmer is a confusing figure because he speaks the language of moderation and natural interest. He used to be the director of public prosecutions. You see, they call him Mr. Rules in the era of alternative facts and Partygate. Starmer made an effective foil of Boris Johnson, but the two men share characteristics. Both approach politics with a grand sense of history, but have little substance to say. Starmer sees himself in the image of Tony Blair and all kind of the really mostly Tony Blair, honestly. But both approach politics with a grand sense of history, but have little of substance to say, which is so true. Starmer probably more intentionally so, but honestly, people, you start to wonder if that mask really is not a mask at all. It's just who he is. Many complain that demagogues are debasing our politics, but that is precisely what modern political communications, the kind pioneered in the UK by New Labour and reproduced as caricature by Starmer, are designed to do. Until recently, Starmer's public image has managed to combine open opportunism with a vague sense of moral mission. Events in Gaza may have cut through this. Faced with a publicly advertised war crime broadcast live by the world's media, Starmer lacked the ability to engage with what was happening. Instead, he felt compelled to take the path of least resistance, a move which usually means sacrificing a progressive policy at the altar of fiscal discipline. In this case, it meant that, public opinion mobilized 6-1 to push for a ceasefire. Starmer found himself endorsing Israel's right to collectively punish the Palestinians and order labor branches not to attend some of the biggest protests in British history, which I'm pretty sure, based on the protests that we saw in London and throughout the country last weekend, and there should be some more coming up, and we'll get to that in our last story. That is going to be continuing to be a pretty big factor as well. There's unspoken hope, both among the left and those who backed him, for his anti-Brexit and socially liberal credentials, that Starmer's conservatism is purely performative. To win in Labour, Starmer makes left-wing promises. To win over Tory voters, he leans right, but in government, he could do something different entirely. Aside from how unlikely that is, it would be the only time in history that Labour was more progressive in government than in opposition. We should also recognize what it means, that our politics are increasingly built inside concentric circles of dishonesty. Such a great way of putting it. It's kind of just kind of funhouse mirror of lies of are you really left? Are you right? Are you changing? It's just a constant impossibility to understand who this man is based on what he ran on the leadership campaign and how he has systematically dropped. It's been incredible. It's like he has a big list in his Chatham House office, and he just goes through the 10 pledges, goes through the whole, everything he ever said, every quote on the campaign, every pledge he ever made, and checks them off once every 2 weeks. It's absolutely insane. And it's just like, what will you do? Who even are you? It's like, oh my God. So the more Starmer promises one thing and does another, the more cynicism he fosters just generally in the political environment as a whole, the more he follows through on his rightward shift, the deeper the damage to society and the more license to war criminals. All roads lead to a Pyrrhic victory. Yeah, so the pure idiocy of Keir Starmer knows no bounds. And I mean, again, as we talked about, it's not really even just idiocy. It's not even just trying to be incompetent. It's just like, this is the things that he believes, from his time as director of public prosecutions, from his time, where he personally, he apologized to Eric Holder for not, prosecuting someone well enough, and during, the Obama administration, he has been somebody who is just, not even super ideological, just about pleasing power and wherever it's at, preferably the more liberal side of power, but, just pleasing power wherever it's at, for as long as he has had a career, being, whether it's, for a little bit, you have to pretend to really love Brexit, for a little bit, you have to pretend to even really love Jeremy Corbyn, but, whatever you have to really do to get power, that is what, Keir Starmer has proven time and time again he is willing to do. So, that includes, by the way, suspending people for saying perfectly valid, reasonable things about the conflict going on right now in Israel and Gaza. A suspended Labour MP is, we got to back up here because this is a Guardian article about a related event, but we have to be very, very clear here because Andy McDonald, one of the few good members of the Labour Parliamentary Party, he is in the Socialist Campaign Group, which is essentially the left-wing flank, for those of you who may not know, of the Labour Party. It's about 30 MPs of about something on 100, or it's like, or sorry, low 200s, I believe. They're like in low 200s MPs, like 200 and, I believe they were at 202 at the last election, but I'm pretty sure it's more now. Anyway, it's a very small proportion of people, and Andy McDonald even smaller. Like, these people have been targeted for deselection, by Keir Starmer nonstop, and so that's why it was really kind of incredibly brave. Why the Middlesbrough MP went up onto the stage at a pro-Palestinian peace rally and said something along the lines of, we have to call for what's right. No, this is what he said. We will not rest until we have justice, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians between the river and the sea, can live in peaceful liberty. Again, I don't know. A big part of what the reaction was, because, is a complete misrepresentation of what he said, saying, Palestine must be free from the river to the sea, which is, considered to be a much more objectionable statement by people. I think falsely so, but I think that's another conversation. The whole point is, he said here, and here's what I think. Like, they know what he said. They know what he said, and whether they agree with it or not, they know what it sounds like. The people, this is from Chris Clarkson, who is defaming Andy McDonald, to Keir Starmer, who suspended him from the Labour Party for the same reason. It's all the same people. They see an opportunity to get rid of somebody who is passionately pro-Palestine, somebody who is actually going to fight for and challenge the barbaric line that Keir Starmer is taking on this, and they don't want that. It's like, why would we have to deal with that? And he used just the words "from the river," or sorry, not even he didn't even say "from." He said "between the river and the sea," just literally speaking about a geographical territory, and he wants all people, including Israelis, not just the Palestinians, including Israelis, to live in freedom there. And that has got him suspended from the Labour Party. So again, essentially what that means is, he is obviously still a member of parliament because he was elected by the people to be in there, but he cannot call himself a Labour MP until there's an investigation, and he has also been suspended from the party. He can't be a card carrying member of the Labour Party. He can't vote in internal elections and stuff like that. But obviously, the much bigger thing is, he cannot stand for election in his next election if this is upheld as a Labour MP. So that means there will be a Labour MP splitting the vote with him in his constituency, the left vote, which has obviously been it's a pretty big threat and pretty big blow to be deselected because of that. So McDonald said, in a speech to a mass rally on October 28, 2023, I called for peace in Israel and Gaza, in particular for an immediate, comprehensively binding ceasefire. Again, this is something, for all people to live in dignity and justice. It's like, they know what he said. Whether they want or really care, and I think it really depends on the person how much they care. But no one really seems to care that much, at least, that Palestinians live in equality and justice, and Israelis do as well. Like, they get that, but it's almost they don't care, and they see the opportunity, based on a similar thing that he said, to drive somebody who is a vocal Palestinian activist out of parliament and out of public life. And if they see that opportunity, by God, they're going to take it. And that includes anyone on the left or the right, the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. Anyway, so Andy McDonald, who represents Middlesbrough, the constituency, said, again, a lot of what he said over the past few days has been deliberately distorted and misrepresented, and perhaps most so by Conservative MP Chris Clarkson, who accused McDonald of trying to justify the murderous actions of Hamas in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for saying, again, and I quote, "In my speech to a mass rally on October 28th, 2013, I called for, we will not rest until we have justice, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians, between the river and the sea, can live in peace and liberty." Again, if you're sitting out there, and you don't want Palestinians and Israelis living in peace from the river to the sea, I think you need to probably, check yourself, because you have some sort of, really kind of deep-seated hatred there of one or the other group. I don't know, but it is, a very benign statement. So it's like, again, it's pretty ridiculous. So between the river and the sea is a deeply sinister and anti-Semitic trope. Again, he's just not even finished. It's like between the river and the sea, it's just like repeating something, using a word that means bad to describe it without even in any way attempting to understand what it means. Just knowing that is coded as bad, completely ignoring any sort of attempt at context and trying to understand it is just really, so obvious what that's been doing. But McDonald has said his solicitors are beginning to set legal proceedings against Clarkson, sending him a letter of claim for libel. The MP added, the Times newspaper misquoted me in an article published online and in print. I took up the matter with them immediately, and the Times corrected the error on their online version and printed an apology in the print paper on 31st of October 2023. Labor peer Mandelson, by the way, big friend of Jeffrey Epstein's, criticized MPs who have used the language that would be interpreted as calling into question the existence of Israel and the right of Israelis to continue to live in their country. I'm afraid that necessitates that person being put outside the tent, and that's what Keir Starmer has done. And you won't even say his name. Again, would you say your friend Jeff's name? Peter, I don't know. And by the way, we are fully outside. I'm pleased to report we are fully outside the scope of UK libel laws. I've consulted with legal authorities on this, so that's why we are the only really truly accurate, honest, and fair British show, or show about British news that you can listen to. Because again, we're not British. We're not in that hell island, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it's really, really. It's really, really remarkable. So here, because he is misrepresenting, as McDonald pretty accurately points out, that Mandelson is willfully misinterpreting McDonald's words in order to further claims that I wish my words to be misinterpreted. It's a Kafkaesque argument. It kind of is. It's pretty crazy. But again, this is another example, probably one of the most clear yet, and one of the most shocking and blatant yet, of the horrific attempt to shut down the debate as this real genocide goes on, by pushing, pro-Palestine, even mildly pro-peace, pro-ceasefire voices at a public life. All right, so we look to our next in a pretty big story today about the Armistice Day protest coming up this Sunday. So it is going to be apparently a pretty provocative and disrespectful to protest at all during that day, according to Rishi Sunak. He's described the protest as such, a pro-Palestinian protest planned for London on Armistice Day, as provocative and disrespectful. The Prime Minister also claimed that there was a clear and present risk, a clear and present danger to the cenotaph and other war memorials. It's very cop speak there on a day when thousands of marchers were due to take to the streets. By the way, again, tens of thousands, hundreds of, it was estimated between 300 and 500,000 were on the streets last weekend in London. So it's going to be a probably similarly sized march there. It has been remarkably peaceful. Again, of 300, 500,000, I think there's been a total of 30, 40 arrests in general. It has been absolutely, shocking how well it has gone. And this just continues to show, I think what is a big kind of cultural divide in Britain between, the nationalists and the kind of progressives of the British politics in terms of this obsession and this, it just obviously, it's the war dead. But again, protesting for what this really is kind of very similar to the last story, using something that is supposed to be sacred in British culture, is supposed to be, kind of out of bounds, to go saying the river to the sea, that, just drawing a boundary, enforcing a boundary that is very, very arbitrary and kind of out of nowhere, and then punishing people who go across it, because that is what, again, this is a Armistice Day. Armistice, and you're criminalizing ceasefire protesters. I mean, come on, who are overwhelmingly peaceful. Make it make sense here. This is just again, calling this disrespectful to the people who, died during the war on Armistice Day. Well, to protest for a ceasefire is pretty illogical, shall we just say. But these protests seem to be going on. The organizers have already said, even though, as some call him, Tom Tugendhat, he said earlier that the planned demonstration by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign on Saturday, 11th November in central London was a matter of great concern to him, and he had written to police about it. The march is taking place again on Armistice Day. But again, it's literally Armistice Day. It's literally a protest for a ceasefire. So by all means, get out there. I hope that people will be fine. Apparently they've said they're not going to go marching by the exactly by the cenotaph now, so they're going to kind of, I guess, let it be, which is perfectly fine. They can still get their message across very effectively. In other parts of London, and still calm down the concern trolls, I guess you could say, of British media, but by and large, I think it is going to be a very, very successful protest weekend for the Palestinian protesters in London, who are incredibly inspiring, even as the Armistice Day ceremonies go off without a relative hitch. All right, that's our first episode. We'll be back next Friday. Hope you enjoyed it. This has been Hell Island.